Hello, sophomores. This is lesson 33, mostly on Christ's crucifixion. It's optional. You do not have to watch this. You will get extra credit if you do and your parents tell me you did. I want to start with a little bit of a warning that this is going to be a difficult 40 minutes or so as we talk about it, even graphic at times. And I struggled with that, with even giving this lecture because it is so gruesome. And you're so young. I know you don't think you are, but you are. And worse, we're not even able to be together so that we can comfort one another about all of this horrible, horrible thing that happened with Jesus, and yet wonderful at the same time. At the same time, I believe we need to hear this. We need to know more than just that our Lord suffered, but we also need to know how much he suffered. And I believe we need to see the cross as the most glorious moment in all of history, because it was, in fact, the King of Glory who hung on that cross. And so, therefore, we can have hope, even in this difficult story. So it's now early in the morning, maybe 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and Jesus has spent much of the night being questioned by members of the Sanhedrin, by Annas, Caiaphas, and other members of the Sanhedrin. He's been hit, he's been spat upon, he's been mistreated, and now they're taking him to Pilate, and they need Pilate because they cannot put anyone to death. And so, at least especially for what Jesus has done. And so they're wanting Pilate, they're wanting Rome to do that. So they bring Jesus to Pilate early in the morning, and here's what it says. We read this last time, but we'll pick up here. Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. To enter the house of a Gentile would defile you, and to do so the day before the Passover Sabbath. That's what this Sabbath was. This is the day of preparation, meaning preparation for the Sabbath. They would not be able to celebrate that special Sabbath the next day if they went into a Gentile's home, because they would be defiled, as if murdering an innocent man is not defilement enough. So they take Jesus to Pilate, and here's the ensuing conversation between Pilate and the Jewish leaders, and then between Pilate and Jesus. So Pilate went outside to them, and said he had to go outside because they wouldn't come inside, and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man were not doing evil, would we not have delivered him? We would not have delivered him over to you." I can't imagine one of you getting in trouble. I can't imagine one of you getting in trouble, but let's just say one of the sophomores got in trouble. And I took that sophomore to Mr. Hood, and I said, "You need to punish this guy or girl, this kid." And Mr. Hood would say, "Why? What did he or she do?" I'd say, "Hey, you think I would bring him to your office without doing something wrong?" I don't think Mr. Hood's going to take that. I don't think Mr. Hood's going to go with that, right? He's going to need to know what happened. And this is essentially what the Jews are trying to do. Obviously, he did something wrong. We brought him to you, right? Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." The Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show what kind of death he was going to die. If he was going to die at the hands of the Romans, it would be a crucifixion. And Jesus has already told his disciples that he would be crucified. So we see this conversation between Pilate and Jesus. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? your own nation and chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not of this world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" I think that was probably dripping with sarcasm. So Jesus says, Pilate says, "So you're a king," and Jesus says, "You say that I am." I think Jesus' point there is saying, you're admitting I'm a king. And if my kingdom isn't of this world, or else my followers would fight. And so then at the end of all this, Pilate responds, "What is truth?" Jesus says that everyone who is of truth listens to my voice. And Pilate, of course, with these words, "What is truth?" it's certainly not listening to the voice of Christ. And his question is interesting in light of what Jesus has just said, because he's proven that he's not part of the truth. Ironically, the truth is standing right in front of him, and he doesn't realize it. Jesus is the truth. He is the way and the truth and the life. And truth, the truth, is standing right in front of him. He doesn't know it. So Pilate goes back outside and pronounced to the Jews that Jesus is innocent. After he had said this, he went back outside after he said, "What is truth?" and to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews?" See, Pilate knew that Jesus wasn't guilty of anything. Not anything deserving death, probably not anything deserving punishment. And yet, he's got these Jewish leaders that don't like him, and he was a particularly bad governor if you look at history. And he had many run-ins with the Jews. And so he's thinking, okay, well, I've got an out because it's Passover and I can release him. They'll say release this guy because everybody else that's in prison has done worse things than this guy. So Pilate goes out to the Jews and he declares Jesus innocent for the first time. He's going to do that 2 more times. And he's thinking he's got an out. But when he gave them the offer to release someone, they cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now, Barabbas was a robber. So Pilate pronounces Jesus innocent. That's the blank that you have to fill in there. But the mob chooses Barabbas over Jesus. They want a murderer who led an insurrection to be released rather than Jesus. They want Barabbas. So then it says, then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him. Very few words. Very horrific thing to have happen. The man that was to be flogged was stripped of his clothing, and his hands were tied to a post above his head so that his back was taut, stretched out. And in Jewish law, you could only give 40 lashes. And they codified this, that they would only give a prisoner 39 lashes just in case they miscounted. They didn't want to break the law by giving a prisoner 41. That they would have been so concerned about the law. But the Romans probably didn't have that same law. And so we have no idea how many times Jesus was flogged, but at least 40 times. And the instrument that was used was a flagellum or a flagrum. It was a whip that had multiple thongs on the end of it, and interspersed in those that heavy leather, those leather thongs, were bits of bone and metal, like balls of metal and rocks and things like that. So that when that hit the back of the accused person, and particularly when they would pull it back. It would not only bruise the flesh, but it would shred it as well. And it would cause contusions that would eventually break open with blood flying everywhere. And the force of that flagellum would come down on the shoulders and the back and the rear end and the back of the legs over and over and over again. First creating bruises, and then open wounds until the skin on the back was hanging in tatters, in ribbons, and the entire area was an unrecognizable mass of flesh. And when the centurion determined that the prisoner was near death, he finally stopped. Jesus was near death even before he got. And so the prisoner would slump to the pavement once they were released from the post. And I'm sure Jesus did, and this is actually not where the pavement might have looked at like this, but this is actually not where this took place. And the Roman soldiers see this opportunity to make fun of this Jew, to make fun of this Jew that said he is a king. And so they throw a robe on his shoulders that were so badly beaten. And they put a stick in his hand for a scepter. But they still need a crown. And so they get some thorns. The thorns were, the branches were very bendable. But the thorns were long, and they were sharp, and they were hard. And I forgot to bring this with me to show you, but Mrs. Cook brought me these. She got them in Israel. And it is believed that this is the very kind of thorn that Jesus' crown, quote unquote, was made of. Can you imagine this being pushed into your head? And so then blood flowed down his face as well. And so they are mocking him and mistreating him and hitting him and further abusing him until finally they get tired of this sadistic sport and they say, "Hail, King of the Jews," to mock him. And so the Romans place a crown of thorns on him and ridicule him. And then, well, here, I'll read this. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you, so that you may know that I find no guilt in him." Second time, Pilate saying, he's not guilty of anything. So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and probably nothing else. And the word for robe is a short robe. So he's being further humiliated in front of a large crowd. So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." And I think what he means by that is, look, he's not a threat to you. Look at him. He's been punished. Isn't that enough? He's not guilty. Pilate was a cruel man. He was not a nice man. And even he knew that Jesus was innocent. But here's the thing. According to Roman law and according to Jewish law, you couldn't scourge someone unless they'd been declared guilty. Has Jesus been declared guilty of anything? No, especially not in Roman court. He's been declared innocent, in fact, twice, and yet he's been scourged. That was another illegality of the trial. It was illegal to scourge him unless he had been convicted of a crime. So he was illegally flogged, both according to Roman law and Jewish law. But still, the people were not satisfied. So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." Third time. He's innocent. Pilate knows it. The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die, because he has made himself the Son of God." When Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. Why? Maybe because he was worried that Jesus really was the Son of God. Or maybe he was worried because he has just scourged a man who is innocent. Or maybe both of those things. So for the third time, Jesus is declared innocent. And then Pilate goes back in again to talk to Jesus. And then he's going to turn him over to be crucified. Pilate entered his headquarters again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have the authority to release you and the authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." And Jesus, they're saying, is making himself to be a king. So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at the place called the Stone Pavement, and in Aramaic, Gabbatha. Now, it was the day of preparation of the Passover, the day of preparation for the Sabbath during the Passover. And it was about the 6th hour, which is just right around noon, 6 hours from sunrise. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he delivered Jesus over to them to be crucified. In other Gospels, we read that the people said, "Let his blood be on our head and on our children." How chilling is that? And they say, "We have no king but Caesar." Caesar is not their king. They're Jewish. That is not to be their king. Jesus is their king. They don't recognize him. So now we get to the crucifixion. And crucifixion was made more torturous and more efficient by the Romans. But it apparently came to that part of the world through Alexander the Great, who learned the practice from the Persians. Now, the cross that we generally see what I'm wearing around my neck and that we generally see is the Latin cross. That may have been the kind of cross Jesus was crucified on. Apparently, the Tau cross, the T cross, was more common in that day. This is the only source I've read that says that, so I'm not sure. I don't think the shape of the cross matters all that much. But crucifixion itself was designed to be the most horrific, the most gruesome, the most painful death ever devised. And indeed, it was. When a person was crucified, they would carry the crossbar to the place of the crucifixion, which had to be outside the city. And the pictures we see is of Jesus carrying the whole cross. The vertical beam, I think it's called the stipes, stayed in the ground. It was permanent. And so they would just carry the crossbar, probably 120 pounds or more, to the site, after being whipped and all that. It would have been difficult, to say the least. And they would lay the victim down on that crossbar. And when we say his hands and his feet, it actually was between the two. This is the radius and this is the ulna. And between those two in the wrist, those two bones, it would be placed and pounded in. It couldn't have been in the hands because the body couldn't have borne that weight. It would have stripped out. But the wrist could. And in medical parlance, and particularly in ancient times, the wrist was considered a part of the hand. So you see here, you've got the radius of the ulna, and that depression there is where that would have been placed. And then he was, before that, even though he had the patibulum tied to his shoulders, and he carried it to Golgotha. There's a road in Jerusalem, and this one has been excavated far below where the road is now, called the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Suffering. And this is believed to be the path that Jesus walked to the cross. I don't know that we can know that for sure, but this road, this is from about the time of Jesus, and it may be the very road. I still want to go to Israel. And of course, having lost so much blood, having been beaten for 12 hours or more, having been scourged, having been mocked, and already having copious blood loss, Jesus, in his anguish, in his pain, both physical and mental, is in a weakened state, and he can't do it. He falls. So they ask a North African onlooker named Simon of Cyrene to carry the cross, to carry the patibulum, the crossbar, to the site. And then there the prisoner is again stripped stripped of his clothes. That it might be that they allowed Jews to wear a loincloth. We don't know that for sure. And the crucifixion begins. Now this picture is a picture of a place that I can't remember his first name, but his last name is Gordon, James maybe Gordon, and he believed that this was Golgotha. He believed it was Golgotha in part because it looks something like a skull, and it would have been outside the city walls, and there is a tomb nearby. Since that time, it's largely been discredited that this is the site of Calvary, that this is the Golgotha, the place of the skull. It is possible, but most theologians believe it's elsewhere. The problem with that other spot is people say, well, but that's inside the city gates, but it wasn't. It was when Jesus was alive. When Jesus was alive, it was outside the city gates. The city gates were later, increased to encompass a larger area. So first, the prisoner is given a mild analgesic. It's wine mixed with myrrh, but he refuses to drink it. That was a fulfillment of prophecy. And as I told you, they drive the nails into his wrists, and then they drag that crossbar and they place it in notches and niches on the cross. And he's lifted up. And ahead and above him is this titulus. It is a sign that whatever they were convicted of was put on a sign above them. And it said, Jesus Christ, the King of the Jews. In fact, when the Jews went to Pilate and said, don't say that, don't write that, don't say he was the King of the Jews, say he claimed to be the King of the Jews. And Pilate then famously said, what I have written, I have written. And so then after he's on the cross, his arms are, one foot would have been laid over the other, and a nail would have been driven, one nail between the top of the foot. This is the hand, I know, but the top of the foot at the ankle, coming out the heel of the other foot, or coming out the heel of the foot and into the other foot. And his legs would have been moderately flexed, a little bit bent. And it would have been horrifically hard to breathe. And in fact, there would have been waves of spasms going through his muscles. And the only way you could breathe, you could breathe in, but you could not breathe out. And so in order to take a breath, you had to open up your lungs for air, because everything was being compressed as you were on that cross. And the only way you could take a breath was by pushing up on the nail in your feet to gasp a breath. And as time goes on, fluid begins to build up in the area around the heart, the pericardium, and carbon dioxide begins to build up in the bloodstream. This is probably how Jesus was able to say the few things that he said, by pushing up on the nails to get the breath to get out what he said. Things like, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do." And to the thief next to him, who puts his trust in Christ, "Today you will be with me in paradise." And to his grief-stricken disciple John, who was the only one to stay with him. And to his grief-stricken mother, who is now without her oldest son, now going to be without her oldest son. He says to John, "Behold your mother." In other words, take care of my mother. And to his mother, "Behold your son." In other words, John is going to take care of you. And indeed he did. And my God, why have you forsaken me? This is the first line of Psalm 22. And Jesus says it intentionally. Now, the typical way people translate this, or what they say it means, is that God turned his back on Jesus. That as Jesus bore the weight of the sin of the whole world, that God couldn't look on that, and so he turned on Jesus, and so he really did forsake Jesus in that moment. And that may be a correct interpretation. But here's what I think. And I could be wrong. When I get to heaven, I'll say, of course, and know if I'm right or not. The first line of Psalm 22, and you can look it up and read it, because it reads like a description of Jesus' crucifixion, written hundreds of years before Jesus was even born. The first line is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And then it goes through and it lists all the things that have happened to him. His bones are out of joint, and they gamble for his clothing, and it's a precise depiction of the crucifixion of Christ. And then we get to the end of the 22nd Psalm, and he says this: "I am poured out like water." This is in the middle. "I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax; it is melted within my breast." This is a depiction of crucifixion. His bones would have been out of joint, and his heart would have been heavy. He would have had huge chest pain during this time. And then this is how it ends. It ends with victory. "All the prosperous of the earth eat and worship before him." Before whom? Before Jesus. "Shall bow, all who go down to the dust, even the one who could not keep himself alive. Even posterity shall serve him," Jesus. "It shall be told of the Lord to the coming generation. They shall come and proclaim his righteousness to people yet unborn." He has done it. What has he done? He has brought salvation to the world. This is all about Jesus. I believe that when Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He was quoting the first line of a psalm to bring the whole psalm to mind. He couldn't have quoted more than that on the cross. Of course, he had the whole thing committed to memory, but he didn't have enough breath to quote it all. So he did something that was common for rabbis of his day. He gave just the first part of it and let all the rest of it come to mind. Just like if I say, you keep saying that word, do not think it means what you think it means. Now you've got the entire Princess Bride in your head if you're a Princess Bride fan. And I hope you are, because it's a great movie. Here's what I think he's saying. Hey, this looks bad, but trust me, it's going to end in victory. It's going to have a happy ending. And then he cries out, it is finished. It is finished. And then into your hands I commit my spirit. So here Jesus is on the cross and he says, it is finished. Another way you could say that is, it is accomplished. Years ago, I heard Tony Campolo, who was a Christian, maybe still is, a Christian author and speaker, and he said that he went to this African-American church and spoke, and the African-American pastor challenged him to a duel, not with pistols, with sermons. He said, you go out there, you give your best shot on a sermon, see if you can fire up the crowd, and then I'll come out and do my best shot and see if I can do better. So they have this competition. They have this sermon competition. I guess, this is what pastors do. And Tony said that he went out and he did great. And the crowd was going wild and everybody was excited. And then this African-American pastor came out and all he said was, it's Friday, but Sunday's coming. And he went through and he said, it's Friday and the disciples are bereft and the disciples are upset and the disciples are downhearted. But Sunday's coming. And he kept repeating that, and he kept repeating what Friday is, that Friday is pain, and Friday is sorrow, and Friday is persecution, and Friday is yucky. But Sunday is coming, and that will change everything. Can you imagine how the disciples felt on that Friday? See, we know that Sunday's coming. We know that Good Friday will be followed by Resurrection Sunday. But they didn't. Maybe some of them were saying, what exactly did he mean when he said it is accomplished? What was accomplished? He died. What was accomplished? That's a good question. We know the obvious answers. Forgiveness of sin, the promise of eternal life. But this portion of John, as we study it, it is Friday. And don't diminish its awfulness. But it's also Good Friday. Do you know what was accomplished? And I'm going to say this personally for me, but if you're a follower of Christ, it's for you too. It is accomplished. The payment for my sin is paid. I am free from sin and death. I am now free to live a life by the power of the Holy Spirit who lives in me. I now live in Christ. I am a new creation in Christ. I have been transformed. I am a child of God. And I will one day live eternally with him in a place where there is no more crying and no more pain and no more tears. Satan has been defeated. All because of the cross of Christ. It is accomplished. My favorite hymn is an old hymn. It's not one we sing in our church as much anymore. My church doesn't sing a whole lot of hymns. I love it when we do them. My favorite hymn is When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. And I'm not going to sing it for you because I can't sing on a good day and I'm getting all worked up and teary-eyed. Now I'd be even worse. But I would like to recite it for you. Here's the four stanzas of When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. When I look at, when I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss and pour contempt on all my pride. Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast Save only, boast in the death of Christ my God. All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them to his blood. See from his head, his hands and feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did ever such love and sorrow meet, or thorns compose so rich a crown? Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were a present far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. Christ has done for me demands I give everything to him. Father, this is hard, and yet it's good, and I am grateful. I am grateful for what you accomplished on that cross. I am grateful that you did it because you love me, because you love us. May we see that you deserve our lives, our souls,